the people that come to me, they usually have a gap that they're working with. So maybe they're in a career situation where they're noticing that they have some things that are getting in the way of them feeling more confident in their workplace. Or, sometimes people come to me and they want to feel more comfortable in their relationships. And a lot of these things are stemmed to introversion and people not really feeling comfortable enough to embrace those traits.
Hello, and welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I am your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we'll air each episode on a Monday. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform. Leave a review, tell a friend, help get the word out there. Kristy Vail is a certified life coach and interior designer. Kristy specializes in helping introverts and highly sensitive people create more alignment in their personal lives and home environments through mindset coaching and interior design consulting. Kristy is also the host of the podcast Connected with Kristy Vail, which has been featured multiple times on the iTunes New and Noteworthy list. This show focuses on conscious conversations about meaningful work, personal growth, and intentional living for introverted and highly sensitive individuals. All right. I'm very excited for my guest, Kristy Vail. Welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast, Kristy.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
All right. So Kristy is also a fellow podcast host, so I enjoy her podcast, and she's puts out some great content on Instagram, and we will get into all that. But first, Kristy, I always like to start. Tell us about yourself and your journey. You're an introvert and a highly sensitive person, and now you're a podcast host and a life coach.
Yeah.
So tell us about how that all came to be.
Yeah. Oh man. It's always funny on where to start these things, but I think that, in my 20s, I started to kind of naturally fall into personal development, in the sense of I started to hear TED Talks and I started to actually get into podcasts, a long time ago. I've probably been listening for about 10 years now. And I started to actually learn about introverts, which I don't think that was even like a term that I had known about in high school. But, and I know some of your guests have shared this too, but Susan Cain's TED Talk was a huge game changer for me because there's like one part in the TED Talk where she's talking about going to like summer camp and like being this like cheering really loud, and just like kind of the dread that I could feel when she was like sharing about that story. I started to connect like all these dots to things that felt really hard as a kid. Even in high school, I remember it felt so ideal to be like the cheerleader type, but every time I like put myself in those dynamics, I felt so uncomfortable and just like not like myself. And it also really drained my energy, which I've now really realized is something that's so important for me to pay attention to. I'm like a lover of getting out of my comfort zone, but I think sometimes it's about finding that balance of, does this drain your energy or does it feel a little bit scary, but it's kind of exciting? So anyways, I started to just kind of go down this rabbit hole. And then I think kind of soon after I learned about Susan Cain, I started to learn about Dr. Elaine Aron, who coined the term highly sensitive person. And that was just like this other light bulb moment where I'm like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. I was always a really big feeler. And, introverts, I think these days, like statistically, introverts are kind of half the population. Highly sensitive people are still a lot smaller. My understanding is we're about 15 to 20%. I'm not really sure where that number stands today, but anyways, so kind of the common thread was I felt different than other people, and it made sense because I typically fell into a smaller bracket of the population. But yeah, from there, the more I started to learn about these things, I just instantly felt more comfortable and confident in myself because I knew that these weren't like weaknesses, like they weren't something I had to change. And everything just started to make sense. So for me, that was like a big part of my story. And then I just continue to learn more and evolve and really understand these personality traits and how I can work with them. And it's made such a huge change to my life.
Yeah, that's amazing. And yeah, you're right. I mean, almost every guest has mentioned Susan Cain, and her TED Talk and her book Quiet, of course, were
Yeah,
very instrumental for most of us embracing our introversion. Of course, there's a lot of other great books out there too, and
yeah,
other content and things. And then with being highly sensitive, yeah, Elaine Aron, that's the book. And your numbers are good. About
yeah,
half the population are introverts,
mm,
and then the highly sensitive. Yeah, I've heard the same thing, like 15
yeah,
to 20%. And I always want to make clear too that introverts or extroverts can be highly sensitive.
hmm,
I think out of those numbers, the numbers are slightly higher for introverts, or maybe
yeah,
more than that. But I like what you said. They're not weaknesses, they're gifts, and you just have to learn about that. And that's why we do the work we do, Kristy, right? It's like
yeah,
we they're not going to change for us, but they can be embraced, and we really
yeah,
can find peace, happiness, success, energy, all of that good
yeah,
stuff when we understand who we are and the gifts that we have.
mm, totally.
How did you embrace it? Like, what are things that,
Mm.
like, yeah, this is who I am? What were some things that helped you after you discovered about introversion and being highly sensitive?
Mm. Yeah, I love that you use the word embrace often on your podcast. When I think of the word embrace, it's this feeling of like softening into something. And I think that when you're doing the opposite, you're like, like I'm making like a fist right now. It's like you're like trying so hard to like fit into something. And so I noticed like I just kind of constantly had that feeling when I was in the wrong places or trying to make like the wrong things work for me. So as I started to learn more about introversion, highly sensitive, and the traits that go along with it, I started to be more intentional about my lifestyle. And I'll give you a couple examples. Like I tend to be a person that likes to be busier, but I noticed that I would have my calendar way too full. And so after working a full-time job, I would be like socializing after work. I had like 20 weekend plans. Like it was always like just back to back to back. And I started to be a little bit more mindful about my schedule, which actually came with saying no to a lot of things. I was starting to say no to more social events. And I noticed that when I was prioritizing just a little bit more white space in my life, I naturally felt a little bit more calm. And then I just started to like slowly build on these intentional decisions. And, I see this a lot with my clients. I think sometimes when we've been doing something for so long, for one, it takes a lot of slowing down and intentionality to like understand, is this actually working for me? Do I need to make some shifts here? And then it's the courage to implement those. I think it can feel kind of scary sometimes to either say no to things or to step away from people sometimes and circumstances that you don't feel good about yourself in. So, yeah, for me, that was really the journey, being more intentional with the new information I had and then having the courage to actually take those steps. What's that like amazing quote? It's like learning is only powerful when you implement it. Like that's the concept, but I can't remember the actual quote. But do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. That's yeah, we can become aware, but that's a lot of times that's where people stop, and it's actually making those changes. And
Yeah.
that sounds very similar to what I found is you have to make your day and your week, your life work for you, and not what somebody else his
Yeah.
life looks like.
Yeah. Totally. Totally.
And I think that was a big thing for me,
Mhm.
like we were talking about before the show,
Yeah.
I wrote my first book because when I was discovering I was an introvert, I also realized I was a busy person and I was studying time management. And I'm like, there's some things about being an introvert that I need to put into my life. We
Yeah.
do need a break from time to time. Um,
Yeah.
we do need to recharge, or we need some quiet time, not even necessarily to recharge, but just to think and do some work and have some space. And so that is all very important.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's just so interesting because the more that you know about this, the more you can experiment and try these things, whether it's, giving yourself total focus at work to do a project and just, again, seeing, are you getting better results and do things feel easier? I've just noticed that the more I'm implementing this, even at first, if it feels uncomfortable, in the long term, it's made my life so much easier. And it's the nicest, like most peaceful feeling just to feel like you're in harmony with these traits that are so natural for you.
Absolutely. And I've really been looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah.
And and you probably have your own routine and ritual around your podcast, but I absolutely have to have some free time before, so I
Mm,
get in the right frame of mind. Again, I've been looking forward to it, but I
yeah.
can't just jump in. I need to have some space to prepare, to get ready for the show. And there's many things like that, different activities where you have to think, what do I need to prepare, or what time do I need after, after this thing, and there's so many things like that, that if you can learn about yourself, things are so much better.
Mm. Okay, let me ask you, David. So
Okay.
what does it look like for you to prepare? Like what did this morning look like for you? I'm just curious because I do something similar.
Okay, that's what I get for interviewing a podcast host,
Yeah,
huh?
back on you.
Yeah. I need to make sure everything's set up, and
Hmm.
I don't ever want to be rushed. That's
Hmm.
too stressful. Um,
Mm,
honestly, I might look at, yeah, your content, just to kind of
yeah,
remember who you are, because
yeah.
so I looked at some posts that you put out. Maybe I had read
Mm,
them before, maybe not, and
yeah,
just really being ready,
yeah.
and not rushing around. That's really
Mm,
important to me.
mm. Love that. I do something so similar of like kind of getting the feel of the person's energy and like putting myself in that headspace as I'm approaching the conversation. So I love that.
Yeah, yeah. So again, we'll both say that introversion comes with many gifts and strengths.
Yeah.
What's a strength of yours from introversion, or being highly sensitive, or both?
Mm, yeah. Um, I think that one thing I've really learned is a strength for me, and it's probably something that comes natural, but it's also something that I really enjoy building on is facilitating meaningful conversations. I really have developed this trust in myself that with the right people, because it doesn't always happen, it's not always going to be the most meaningful conversation, but I will say those come really naturally to me. And I think it's because, as a highly sensitive person and an introvert, and probably, many other parts of who I am, I'm naturally really interested in other people. And so for me, yeah, I love meaningful conversations. I love getting to know people. I love talking to people like you, and it just energizes me so much. So I'd say that's one of my favorite strengths.
Absolutely. And definitely on this show, we bust myths here about
Yeah.
introversion. And that's so part of this, along
Yeah.
with your strength,
Hmm.
is I love what you said, because I don't like when people generalize and say introverts are drained by people. And I
Yeah.
say, well, I can be drained by certain people and
Yeah.
certain situations,
Mm,
but I can also absolutely be energized by people, like right now.
yeah.
And yes, we need people. We like people. We like to connect with people. So that's a big myth right there. But like you said, part of your gift is being
Mm,
able to have meaningful conversations and facilitate those, and help those to happen. And
yeah.
that's amazing. But again, that's So strength and busting a myth right there too.
That's so
Uh,
true.
and the other thing is half the population, and I think that probably comes up in most of my podcasts too, that
Mhm.
introverts are half the population, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
So we're not all the same.
Yeah.
So in working with clients, what other strengths do you see that maybe are different than yours as far as being an introvert?
Oh, that's different than mine. Yeah, I mean, I think like, how I want to answer that is it's been so, again, I love getting to know people. And so it's been so amazing to work with so many introverts that have completely different cultural backgrounds than me, or, different experiences in their life that inform who they are. And so I think it's been really cool to see their strengths. And so whether it's how they uniquely connect with people, or you're the Myers-Briggs guy, but I tend to work with a lot of INFJs, and I'm also an INFJ, and so I'm always really lit up by helping my clients realize these these strengths of creating really unique solutions, and they don't even realize they're doing it. And I'm like, that's so cool that you have put this into place, or that you helped this person come up with this solution. And for them, it's so natural. So yeah, it's always really fun to really highlight people's strengths and kind of be able to shine a light on that, because sometimes we're so close to it and it feels so natural for us. But when someone reflects that back to us, it can really be really empowering.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all have our own strengths, and sometimes we can't even see our own. And there's
Yeah.
too much of a one size fits all approach to things at work and other aspects of our life. And
Yeah.
really, it takes all of us. And that's one thing I do like about the Myers-Briggs is it does separate. It's a tool. I mean, again, 50% of the population, we're not all the same, but it
Yeah.
helps us to see. It gives us some things like, we're similar. I'm an INTJ, and so
Mm,
you're
yeah.
definitely feeling more, and
Yeah.
and is versus thinking. But again, everybody thinks, everybody feels, but it's just, where's that emphasis and where's our gifts kind of thing.
Yeah.
Is there any other myths that you want to bust today about introversion?
Yeah. So do you know Adam Grant?
Yes,
So for the listeners, in case anyone doesn't know, I think he's an occupational psychologist. Is that right?
that sounds right.
Okay. So he wrote a book recently called Think Again. Anyways, absolutely amazing work, really interesting research. And something that I see as a myth, I've seen it with my clients, I've experienced myself, is sometimes this pressure that we feel to have the answers on the spot. And so, actually, a lot of people come to me and they'll talk about the fear of like, what if I'm in a meeting and my boss asks me for this? Or like, what if there's like this window and I miss the opportunity to share the ideas? Like, there is this sense of urgency. And I think it's a huge myth to think that the people that are first to speak have the best ideas. And so, what I really like to help people realize is actually your thoughtfulness and your ability to process and take in other informations and be discerning in what ideas you bring to the table is so huge. And I think that that's a huge introvert quality and a strength. And so I just feel that it's such a myth when we put so much emphasis on like those like quick ideas and the people that like always have the answers. And yeah, Adam Grant's done a lot of research on this. And it's been something I've always felt to be true, but it's also really interesting to have the research to back it up, to be like, oh my gosh, those aren't the people that are seen as the most confident or competent. It's I think also on that note too, being able to share your ideas in a succinct way, I think is like a skill that I know has developed my confidence a lot. And so being thoughtful, allowing myself time to process, and then knowing the most powerful and confident way to share ideas. So that's kind of a myth that I like to bust.
Oh man, that's one of the biggest keys right there.
Yeah.
Um, we are deep thinkers,
Yeah.
and that means we have some great ideas.
Yeah.
And just the way that we process and need time to think about it, it can be dismissed and discounted, that we don't have great ideas.
Yeah.
But we're not, again, this probably comes up just about every time too, but
Yeah.
introverts, we think and then we speak. And a lot of times we're putting together our best ideas and saying what's most important. And
Mm.
we're as extroverts, and again, never bashing extroverts, but
Yeah.
they speak in order to think. And it's just a different style of communication. And if you don't
Mm.
understand that, you can definitely feel like your ideas are dismissed. But if you can learn to get your ideas out there, some of that comes with preparation,
Yeah.
before the
Yep.
meeting.
Totally.
Do your research. What do I need to know about this, and
Yeah.
not be in a new situation. And I'll say this too, it's a lot of times it's like we do need time to think. If it's
Hmm.
something that we've thought about a lot, we might not need as much, like what we're
Yeah.
talking about today.
Yeah.
We both are, very comfortable talking about introversion. We could probably talk all day. Um, but
Yeah.
and so the story behind Quiet and Strong,
Yeah.
I was in a Strengths Quest training. It's called
Mm.
Clifton Strengths now, and it was
Yeah.
like a 3-day thing. So I was being trained to basically be a trainer, and I thought I was participating plenty.
Hmm.
And after the 3 days, the facilitator came up to me, and it was a compliment. She was saying, "You're quiet and strong." She said,
Wow.
so she said, when you speak, people listen. And what she was saying is exactly what we're talking about, is
Hmm.
that I wasn't, talking nonstop, but I was giving very thoughtful responses because I was thinking about them. And that really stuck. And so the quiet part, it's not being shy,
Hmm.
it's being thoughtful. And so
Yeah.
that really stuck with me. So I love what you said. It's like, yeah, we really need to think. And I think some of the best ideas come with time. Sometimes you and we're going to come up with quick responses and quick ideas. But,
Totally.
as I look at some decisions I've made over the years, and I think about, you know, if I hadn't taken my time with this, it probably wouldn't have gone as well. Again, it just depends. It's like, and I don't want people to think, oh, you always need lots of time. No, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't.
Totally. And I think that this is such an important thing. And I really think about the word discernment a lot in terms of any advice that I either share on my show or thoughts that I have, or I think it's always so harmful to like do absolutes like this applies to all. Like I feel like we're just so far past that. I think there's definitely things that are universal, but we all connect to it in different ways. So I totally hear you on that. And it makes so much sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about tell us about your podcast, Connected with Kristy Vail.
Mm. So yeah, it's really funny. As I shared at the beginning, I have been listening to podcasts for, oh my gosh, yeah, probably 10 years, maybe slightly less. I started with, I think Serial was the first podcast I listened to. So I am like a true crime investigative junkie.
Okay.
And I just, again, this was also a part of me understanding my introversion. And I realized that it was so enjoyable for me to have alone time and listen to podcasts. So as I, was continuing my personal growth journey and just really learning more about myself and making these lifestyle changes, I ended up getting to a point about 4 years ago, maybe, yeah, actually just over 3 years ago. And I had been thinking about launching a podcast myself and sharing some of the things that I had been learning and some of the changes that I made that really made my life so much easier and more meaningful. And I started to share this on the podcast. So yeah, I launched it and I started talking about how certain things would feel so hard in my childhood. And now that I've made these changes, things started to make more sense and I started to naturally feel more comfortable. And not that I was doing anything wrong, it's that my approach to life and how I internalize things is a little bit different than a lot of the people that I was spending time with. So yeah, the podcast is a mix of solo episodes where I touch on a lot of common themes that I see with coaching clients or experience in my own life. I really love being a guinea pig and kind of giving people a deep understanding of specific examples, because again, even though my specific example might not apply directly to someone in the same way, I think that we all have these universal similarities. And when we can connect to someone's specific story, it gives us, sometimes inspiration or ideas that we can apply into our own life. And then, much like your show, I also interview other people who sometimes they're introverted people, sometimes identify as highly sensitive, but it's the people that are also doing meaningful work in the world. So we go deep into that because I think that that's also important for a lot of introverts to do meaningful work. So it's always fun to talk about how someone got to where they are today and how they've been able to define their own, version of success in a unique way.
Yeah, meaningful work. That's what it's all about,
Yeah.
And I feel the same. And so let's talk about your meaningful work. So now you're
Mm,
a life coach. Tell us
yeah.
about the coaching work you do.
Yeah. Thank you for asking. So when I launched my podcast, I started to get a lot of people reaching out saying things like, oh my gosh, I've never heard someone talk so in depth about this. I feel like you're speaking directly to me. And I started to just have a lot of people say, oh my gosh, this is so me. This is definitely something that I struggle with. I feel like you're a little bit further along on this. And so I was working with a business coach at that time, and she really encouraged me. She's like, you know what, why don't you just try it on and see how it feels to be working with people. You're someone that has clearly done a lot of personal growth work. You're also really good at listening to people and being able to hold that space, which, that I know that you coach yourself too. And I think that that's like a really big part of it is not so much jumping in and advising, but just like sitting with someone. Like I've seen so much power in that over the years of it's not about the value that I bring as a coach. It's really about holding the space and helping someone unpack their own value. So that's really what my coaching is about. And the people that come to me, they usually have a gap that they're working with. So maybe they're in a career situation where they're noticing that they have some things that are getting in the way of them feeling more confident in their workplace. Or sometimes people come to me and they want to feel more comfortable in their relationships, and a lot of these things are stemmed to introversion and people not really feeling comfortable enough to embrace those traits. So for one, I do a lot of holding space, reflecting back, and helping people, working in a collaborative way so people can come up with solutions that feel good for their situation. And from there, once people start to make those changes, their life really starts to evolve and things feel different. They feel easier. So that's a lot of the work that I do in coaching. And yeah, it's incredibly meaningful.
Yeah, and I love that because there's too many people that think that, as a coach, you're going to fix somebody, right? But I love
Yeah.
how you put it that's not how it works. That's not where our growth comes from. It's you're helping them by, as you put it, holding space. And there's a lot of misconceptions around that too. Like, what's it going to take to make changes? And yeah, I love how you describe your coaching work.
Thanks. Well, and you know what? I'll be totally honest, it has been such a process for me. I was joking with a friend recently. I feel like I'm kind of almost like on the other side of a coaching cult. And I say that because, I think that in any industry, there's people that are doing work that's in their own integrity, that's really service based. And I think in the coaching industry, there's also a lot of ego involved. There's a lot of advising in the sense that I know what's best for you, and this is what you need to do. And over the years, I've really been able to settle into, oh my gosh, like coaching is not about me. It's about the client, and it needs to be client focused. And so, yeah, it's actually been, for the last couple of years, it's been a lot of processing what I learned in the coaching industry, and letting a lot of it go. And I recently took a certification program, and I was so lit up by it. Not only was the curriculum amazing, the discussions in between the training was just so deep and meaningful. And these were people that were so the real deal, like conversations like you and I are having, that it were, again, it's not about this fixer of the value is like being able to provide the right solutions or knowing the right thing to say. It's knowing the client brings the value. And every time I like think of that or write that down, it puts me in a place where I'm the observer. I'm just helping them unpack the value. And that has been such a game changer in my coaching practice, actually. So yeah, I just wanted to touch on that because I actually think there's some harmful things in the coaching industry, and it's a learning process for all of us to facilitate in a really good way.
Yeah. Again, that's amazing. And it's the facilitation.
Yeah.
And I see that outside of
Mhm.
coaching too, and
Yeah.
where it's really people need to understand their strengths. And
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell somebody else, this is how you should do things, but
Yeah.
I can help them figure out the best way.
Yeah.
Um, I'm a big Marcus Buckingham fan. Are you familiar with him?
No.
So he with the Strengths Quest work, he did that with Donald Clifton many years ago, and
Hmm.
and anyway, he's got a new book out. It's not out yet, but it's called Love and Work.
Hmm.
And he said something. So I'm attending a series of webinars with that, like anticipating the book coming out. And he
Yeah.
said, really, it's about, okay, well, what are the outcomes? And
Hmm.
how do you get there? But how do
Hmm.
you get there as an individual? Or if you're working with, if you're supervising someone, how do you get there? Not here's how you have to do it, but here's what we need. But then how do you how do you use your strengths to get to that place? And
Hmm.
that's it. It's like I can't tell you how to do things your best way, but
Yeah.
I can help you figure out, you come to that, like what is your best way. So yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And I think that really shows like a sign of a great leader of knowing that, people learn and make moves in different ways. And this one size fits all, like you mentioned in the beginning, it's harmful for people because, again, I know as an introvert, a highly sensitive person, I was proudly and recently diagnosed with ADHD. I know myself that what works for other people has not worked for me. And so, how can we work with people so they understand what works for them, not assigning them something that works for you? I think that that's something that has been a huge shift for me, and it's really informed the way that I work with people.
Yeah, exactly. So before you did all this, you were an interior designer,
Yeah.
and you still are, of course.
Yeah.
And I'm very interested in how that plays into the work that you're doing now. And I know that it does somewhat, and you can definitely talk about that. But our physical environments are so important to our personality as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So how do you how do our physical environments impact our well-being as introverts or highly sensitive people?
Oh my gosh, it's so huge. And so, just to kind of start, because I think when people hear, it's funny, I met someone the other day who had a very different personality type than me. And I think they were like, so you're an interior designer and a life coach? And they were just kind of like, this person seems all over the place, which is
Huh.
totally fine. At first, it might seem like that, but there's actually so much of an overlap. So for me, I was like the kid that was always like moving things around in my room, like putting up a new collage, making art projects out of dance costumes. Like I just was always doing things in my space to make it feel better. And so, right out of high school, I actually went to interior design school. I specialized in residential interior design, and I also did some commercial work. And I really started to notice that our spaces have such a psychological impact on our well-being. And so you can feel that, you can go into a space, whether it's a public space or someone's home, and you might actually feel unsafe. And so, we're constantly taking in the stimulation of our environments. And so I think, kind of going back to what I shared when I started to learn about introversion, it's so important to be intentional about the spaces that we're in. And especially when you have control of your home environment, whatever that looks like. Maybe you live with a family, or roommates, or whatever your living situation is. I think that if you can have some level of control of, okay, an ownership of, this is my area, how can I make this feel the best for me? It's a huge part in how we recharge as introverts. And same as a highly sensitive person, again, stimulation. So it's funny because I really realized that when I controlled my clutter, I felt so much better. And so probably about 10 years ago, I started to just get in the habit of making my bed every day. And again, the psychological impact it had every single day of like kind of just feeling more put together, having things feel visually good, checking something off, like, doing a small accomplishment. I started to just notice all these little things about our spaces. And so my work today as an interior designer, I mostly just do consulting with people. And it's kind of funny, I was sharing with you before we hit record that I don't always force them together. It's not like I'm like, okay, we're going to do some interior design work now, and here's some coaching. It's really organic. And so if someone comes to me and they want help with their space, oftentimes, they'll have either like a space planning challenge, or I have a lot of people that have bought places and they have some things, but it's feeling either too bare or it's not feeling cohesive. So we'll work on solutions that they can implement to start to kind of warm up this space. But it's funny with that because I'm always taking a coaching approach, in the sense I'm identifying the gap and where they are now in their home and where they want to be. And we're working collaboratively for them to implement solutions that are going to work for them. And then it's funny with coaching clients, again, it's not like, okay, now today we're going to talk about your home environment.
Right.
But again, our environments impact us so much. And so I see a lot of introverted clients that when they were going into the office, they were constantly feeling overwhelmed, or they were not always getting the best work done because they weren't able to focus, because they were constantly being interrupted by people that wanted to talk. And so it's also about, being mindful of your surroundings. And sometimes that's setting boundaries with people in your home or in your workplace. So the overlap is just so huge. And kind of on a final note of that, it's I also think we're so impacted by the aesthetic. And so I really love to encourage people to create a space that feels good for you. So whether it's having visuals that make you feel really happy, and then also balancing that with some white space. Like, don't be afraid to have some walls in your house feel bare, especially if you haven't found that right piece of art, or maybe it's even a sliver of wall. Don't feel the need to fill it. Like, sometimes we need that white space, and might feel right one day to put something there, or it might just be something that you don't need to have there. So that's my ramble on design and our spaces.
I love it. And again, it's not always going to be a factor in the coaching work that you do,
Yeah.
but it's our spaces and our personalities. It's so important. And I was
Yeah.
sharing with you before the show too that I started working from home 2 years ago, like a lot of people,
Yeah.
and thought it was a very temporary situation. At the time, I
Yeah.
had a house full. There was 5 of us here, and it wasn't. It was kind of stressful time for
Yeah.
everybody,
Yeah.
and it wasn't that great. But
Yeah.
now, and at the same time, I realized I was thinking that it was going to be a short-term thing,
Yeah.
and now here I am 2 years later, where I'm going into the office some days, but I'm still in my same space, and I need to improve it a little bit. I need to, and it's the way it looks, like you were saying, is the aesthetics of it all. But it's
Yeah.
also, you know, can I focus? Can I have that quiet time when I need it? And it's a lot of setting boundaries.
Yeah.
And I think that's so with the pandemic, people think, well, introverts are having a great time, this is good. But what did their home environment look like? Did they
Mhm.
have a house full? Or did they have nice and quiet? Or sometimes, I know one introvert in particular that had too much quiet time, and that
Yeah.
was really hard for her. So it's really, you got to think about, what do I need and how can I get that? What
Mhm.
boundaries do I have to set with other people? What physical changes can I make? And it's
Yeah.
all very important to our well-being, for sure.
Yeah. And like you said, everyone's situation is so different. And so I think it's always like really funny, the blanket statements of like, oh, introverts are thriving right now. And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, some of them are, and some extroverts are like, it's so unique to everyone. But yeah, there's some people that like you said, you had your whole family at home. Like I can't even imagine. And so for me, my actually kind of work life, I guess, didn't really look that different. My husband has to go and he's an essential worker. And I've worked from home for years. And so it actually didn't really feel that different for me. But I know for so many people, they're taking Zoom meetings and there are other people that need to be in the house, or they're also having to like teach their kids. Like, oh my gosh, people have been thrown so much in the last couple of years. So yeah, it's but I think it is important to be able to, if you can find something to help you be able to, I think thrive sometimes feels a little bit lofty, but again, make your work situation easier or more productive. It's good to experiment with those things.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you said Zoom meetings, and I just think, I try to use headphones so I don't bother the family, but
Yeah.
they hear me no matter what. So, and I my wife has always worked from home, so we've all been kind of in her space, and so that's definitely been an adjustment for us all.
Yeah.
So with the coaching, or with
Mhm.
people's spaces, how do introverts that aren't confident, because some are very confident and always have been, but how do introverts gain confidence? How do you see that
Yeah.
happening?
Hmm. Yeah, and I'm sure you could relate to this in the work that you've done. I think the self-discovery process of introverts is, again, it's this evolving process. It's not one strategy that's going to like make you feel more confident overnight. It's sometimes a slow gain. And I think that even having that awareness that, oh, this is like a process, can be really empowering for people. And again, it takes off that pressure to feel like, oh my gosh, when I get there, I'm going to be so confident. People are going to see me as confident. No, it's like this ever evolving process. I think that there's no day where I'm ever going to feel 100% confident, but it's being able to really tap into that self-confidence. And I have this on my website. It's this quote that I found years ago when I was doing some research on confidence. And kind of to go back to that is, I think like, especially for business owners, we're always looking for like, what's our niche? Like, who are we speaking to? And I started to notice, for one, the personality type of the people that were coming to me, the traits were highly sensitive and introverted traits. And I would also notice in the intake form that the biggest thing that people struggled with was confidence. And so I started to just like, very ADHD of me, like go hyper focused onto like confidence and learning more about that. And what does that look like for people? And I found this like amazing definition that says, self-confidence is that quiet inner knowing that you are always capable. And it just like was such a light bulb moment for me, because I think when I even look back to my own life and when I think of client examples, when we don't feel confident, we don't feel capable. And so I remember when I would have that self hesitation or feeling like, oh, you can't handle this. Like, I would really play small, and I would shy away from things that could potentially be really huge opportunities for me, or, whether it was career opportunities or opportunities to connect with someone deeper. um, I would shy away from them because I didn't have that self-confidence that I was capable of. If something didn't go perfect, or if I felt uncomfortable, how would I hold myself? And so, yeah, I like to like bring up that quote because, again, even like we'll look at a specific example of like if someone wants to share an idea in a meeting, it's that feeling like, oh my gosh, well, like, what if it doesn't come out well? Or what if it's not well received? Or like, what if I'm like so nervous that I blank or I can't think of something? When you like start to develop that inner confidence, you start to take a little bit more chances because you know that things don't have to go perfect. And if your idea in a meeting isn't like perfectly articulated, or if everyone doesn't like give you a standing ovation, it's okay. It's not your one chance to like prove yourself at work. It's again, it's looking at things as like an evolving process. And so let's say you go in, this happened to me recently. I went into a meeting with an organization I'm talking to, and I had, a pretty good meeting, but I left just feeling like I wish I would have said something more or gone deeper into this. And so I just simply sent them a follow-up email, thanked them for their time, and also said, hey, you know what? I kind of drove it home in that email. So again, knowing that you have this capability just allows you to take more chances. And then I think the self-confidence continues to grow from there.
Yeah, I love that quote. That's great. And
Yeah.
it's self-awareness, who you are, that you're amazing who you are,
Yeah.
and that it's a process. That's very important to remember.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Kristy, I could talk to you all day.
Me too. Me
So this
too.
has been wonderful conversation. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you would like to hit on?
Oh my gosh. I don't think so. I really loved where the conversation went today, and you're so easy to talk to, and you're clearly so good at this. And it's always like a pleasure just being able to have these meaningful conversations. Um, I guess if I had any like final words for someone, yeah, anyone that's like really struggling with their confidence, just continue to get to know yourself. And I know for me, anytime that kind of the confidence issues come up, or those sense of insecurities, sometimes it's good to take a step back. And my favorite tool is like going for a walk, go for a walk, process things. And I don't know if you relate to this, but I know that I'm someone that has a tendency to take things too seriously. And so sometimes it's just like shaking things out, and it's reminding myself that like I don't have to take life so seriously. And that's also been a big boost of confidence for me because again, I'm not so fixed on like that one outcome, or like how I showed up in this situation. It's just it gives me that sense of lightness. So I thought that I'd share that for anyone that might be struggling today.
Yes, and I relate. I definitely have
Yeah.
to remind myself of that. All right, so Kristy Vail, podcast host, life coach, and interior designer. Where do people
Yeah.
find out more or connect with you?
Yeah. So my website is Kristy Vail Studio. And also, if you're someone that is struggling with your confidence, I have a workshop that I created, and it's really about 5 ways to feel more confident the next time you're doubting yourself. And so I think as highly sensitive and introverted people, we often struggle with overthinking, overwhelm, and different forms of self-doubt. So that's on my website if you want to tune into that. It's video, but I've also made it an audio version. So if you like to listen to a podcast, you can grab that. And honestly, I have an on and off relationship with social media. So,
Okay.
you can definitely reach out to me and connect with me on social. I'm on Instagram at Kristy Vail Studio. And I love connecting with there. I have to be mindful of how much I consume on there. So anyways, I spend a lot less time on there than I used to, but I still like being there.
All right. Well, thanks again. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Oh, thank you so much. This was such a pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to further connecting with you. Reach out at david@quietandstrong.com. Check out the website, quietandstrong.com. I'll add social media channels for me and my guests to the show notes. Please comment on social media posts. Send me topics or guests you'd like to see on the show. There's so many great things about being an introvert, and so we need those to be understood. Get to know your introverted strengths and needs and be strong.